Dnipropetrovsk, March of 1989, around 3 p.m. When the majority of tenants of multi-story building were at work, a pensioner Raissa Litko, returning home from walking her doggy, saw a dead body of her neighbor Alina Feofanova, a conservator at the local Fine Arts Museum. The body was leaned against the wall. The clothes on her stomach were blood-soaked. The scared neighbor started to cry for help. When the police arrived, Raissa told them that she was walking with the dog for 20 minutes. When she was leaving the building, the body was not there. She never noticed if anyone entered or exited the front door. Raissa called the victim's husband and asked him to come along ASAP, without mentioning that his wife was dead. However, her scared voice left no doubts that something really bad happened. The expert confirmed that the death occurred minutes ago. The woman was stabbed with a knife which was not found on the crime scene. Next to the body was a suitcase and a purse with a ticket for the tonight flight to Moscow. The passport, keys and wallet were in the purse. In the middle of the crime scene examination, the victim's husband Igor showed up. He was not allowed to approach the body. Instead, officers walked him to the apartment. On the floor, a detective saw a rubbed-off stain, which the criminalists determined as blood. More blood was also found on the fur pom-pom found nearby. Igor was sure his wife wore nothing with a pom-pom. He told he worked as a planning department head at a machine-building plant. He left for work at 7:30 as usual. His wife was going to fly to Moscow today to visit her aunt. Meanwhile, the criminalists found a blood-stained towel in a trash bin. Most likely it was used to wipe off the blood on the floor. A broken thermos flask was also found in the bin. Igor said they did have an old Chinese thermos, a blue one with a red rose. Possibly his wife meant to take it along, but dropped it and cut herself gathering shards. The thermos case was never found in the apartment, however. The detective noticed a fish tank, and Igor explained that recently Alina grew fond of goldfish. The husband's fingerprints and blood sample were collected. The examination revealed that blood on the floor, on the towel, and on the pom-pom belonged neither to the victim nor to her husband. Thus, someone else was in the apartment. Her staff mates at the Fine Arts Museum could tell about Alina's connections, and the next day detectives went there. In the lobby, the museum conservator Lidia Gertsanova was discussing the tragic event with Petro Leleka. The man worked at a workshop of the fishing and hunting shop, making and repairing fish tanks, and was an avid fan of goldfish. He brought Alina some fish tank weeds and learned about the tragedy. Petro met Alina at a sport club. He consulted her on how to best keep goldfish in a tank. Fish tanks became one of the most popular hobbies in the USSR, where there were about 10 million aquarists in early 1980s. The domestic production and retail, however, did not cater for the needs of the Soviet goldfish collectors. Pet shops only offered standard carcass tanks with a volume from 12 to 72 liters. Larger vessels with a content of 120 to 200 liters were only made by one factory in Riga. Buying such a tank was a real gift of fate. The fish tank equipment was no less of a problem. All you could buy was the nets, filters, scrubs, noisy compressors, and one type of a water heater. The rest of accessories were either made with own hands or ordered from masters. It included feeders, distillers, lamps, and of course custom-tailored tanks themselves. Sergei Obraztsov, the famous founder of the Puppet Theater, was one of the most passionate aquarists. He placed multiple fish tanks full of his colorful pets across his theater. Recording the master's contact details, the detectives let him go, turning their questions to Lydia. The conservator told that she always went for lunch with Alina, who liked to share her troubles and concerns. During the past months, Alina was at the brink of divorce with her husband. Igor had a side affair and planned to leave her. Alina was not going to give up, however. She worked on herself, lost weight, changed her haircut and dye, renewed her clothes. She went in for the goldfish hobby and started to attend a sport club. Her efforts paid back. Her husband stayed with her. At least so it seemed to Alina, and that was what she told Lydia during their last cup of coffee. Alina turned down the cake, saying that she had to stay fit after losing 15 pounds. Her self-confidence really soared, and she proudly confessed to Lydia that she was not sure she would be ready to forgive her husband. Alina felt being on top of the situation and was not going to yield the initiative. Lydia found out about her girlfriend's death from the museum director. Officers showed her a photo of pom-pom found in the victim's apartment, but Lydia said she'd never seen it on Alina. Alongside that, she mentioned she had seen a coat with such pom-poms in a shop window of the central department store. She even thought about buying such a coat, but then turned down the idea. Too expensive. Talking about Igor's affair, all Lydia knew was that his girlfriend was younger than Alina and that she works at a shoe section of the central department store. Yes, exactly the store where she saw a coat with pom-poms. Detectives found out that the name and address of Igor's mistress, Natalia Zaitseva. The store manager told that the woman has been on a sickness leave since yesterday. The investigators met her by her building's front door and noticed wounds on her hand. Natalia explained that a cat had scratched her, but could not offer a reason why a pom-pom was missing on her coat. She was detained. The blood test and fingerprints analysis yielded positive results. Natalia Zaitseva was in the victim's apartment. The woman claimed she did not kill her lover's wife. She did indeed come to see Alina and to ask her to let her husband free because he was too meek and weak to make the final step towards the divorce. Natalia further told that at the last point, Igor changed his mind. Her girlfriend started to mock her, which triggered her decision to talk to Alina. Natalia really wore the coat with pom-poms she had recently bought at the department store. She was begging Alina to step down. Her chance for a happy life with Igor was already missed. She also told that Igor had proposed to her. However, her words did not meet with Alina's understanding. She just insulted Natalia and said that the conversation was over. The mistress tried to make it clear that Igor would stay with her anyway. Alina slapped Natalia on the face and pushed her out of the apartment, threatening to kill her. The young woman said that she was at Alina's at 1:30, that is about 90 minutes before the murder. The story was hard to buy, but most importantly, nobody could corroborate Natalia's testimony. As her despair grew, she told that despite cheating on Alina, Igor was immensely jealous of her, and for a reason too. Once Igor declined to stay at Natalia's overnight, saying that a few days ago he saw some Georgian guy giving a lift to Alina. The fellow looked dangerous. Igor explained that he was not jealous, he just was worried for his wife. At that point, Natalia understood that Igor's vows did not mean a lot. He would bring up his wife's subject more and more frequently and could not refrain from it even on Natalia's birthday. It seemed like Igor would curse his wife, complain on her cooking inaptitude, and on her frequent coming home plastered lately. However, his endless references to her irked Natalia. Her conviction that Igor still loves Alina more than herself was growing. The detectives made it clear Natalia is a prime suspect in the case. She had a serious motive, jealousy, a desire to get rid of the rival. Plus, there are stronger evidence proving her presence in the Feofanov's apartment. Natalia insisted that at the time of the murder, she was at her dentist, which can be easily verified. Alina Feofanova, employee of the Fine Arts Museum, is murdered right next to her own apartment. That day, the victim was set for a trip. A suspect is her husband's mistress, Natalia Zaitseva, a salesgirl at the Central Department Store. The investigation reveals that shortly before the murder, Natalia visited the Feofanov's apartment to talk to her rival. Alina slapped her in the face, which explains the blood stain on the floor and a torn-off pom-pom from her coat. Natalia swears she did not kill Alina, and the dentist she was seeing at the time can prove her alibi. The detective had enough material to have a serious conversation with Igor, the victim's husband. He could not but recognize a fur pom-pom from his mistress's coat, and must have guessed who committed the crime, but concealed it from the investigation. Igor admitted, yes, he recognized the evidence, but withheld it, as he was sure Natalia could not have killed. If he had shared the whole story of relations within their love triangle, the detectives would have automatically called him and Natalia guilty. Who must be looked for is the Georgian Alina mingled with. He was getting her drunk. It was only once that Igor saw the man. He was standing by their building, a car pulled over, tipsy. Alina got out of it, followed by a stranger looking like a man from the Caucasus. Igor lashed out at her with infidelity accusations. The wife said she considered herself free after his cheating on her. Igor started a fight, but the man was stronger. Twisting Igor's hands, he went on lecturing how a man should behave with a woman. Back at home, Alina became more complacent. She said she joined a sport club where she met the Caucasian, who just offered her a lift. Igor decided to double-check her story. Secretly, he walked around the sport clubs, and Alina was not in a single member list. By then, it was known that the dentist proved Natalia's alibi, which called for looking for other leads. The mysterious Caucasian was among the top priorities. The aquarist supplying Alina with water weeds could prompt the address of the sport club. The detectives went to see him at his workplace. In the workshop next to Petrola Leka was his granddaughter Irina doing homework. The master explained that he was a grandpa and a guardian. The girl's mother died and her father was an incurable alcoholic. The detective paid attention to the girl's drawing. The sociable girl bragged that everyone thinks she's talented. Alina, working at the Fine Arts Museum, called her a prodigy and even paid her 5 rubles for a picture with a fish. Petrov commended Alina was a kind-hearted woman and was glad to support the orphan. She also promised to solicit her admission to the arts school next year. The man also admitted he knew the Georgian. He was a coach at the club named Kaha. The club operates on the premises of the Ilich Culture Club. 1980s were the last decade when mass physical culture was part of the country's lifestyle. After that, they began to close up one after another. The club started mushrooming in 1959 when the country leadership decided to turn physical culture into a mass movement. During the next 5 years, sports centers were being built in all towns and cities. Young people joined different sports sections. Middle-aged and older citizens attended rehabilitation groups. Impressive sport achievements were not a goal. These facilities were known for the spirit of friendship and mutual support. One of the Soviet Times comedies features a group of this kind. A young ambitious coach does her best to be relieved from training a group of old men, but at the end of the day, the hopeless trainees show an excellent physical shape and capture a criminal. Petrola Leka described Kaha as a kind man. He added that he never observed any romantic relations between Alina and the coach. Kaha must be available later today. Their group has a scheduled training. Meeting the detectives, Kaha looked relaxed. He indeed gave Alina a lift once. She said she twisted her ankle. As they approached her home, Kaha understood she was using him to heat up her husband's jealousy. At the next training, he asked to be kept off such manipulations. The coach had an alibi on the time of murder. He was teaching a PE class at a college up until 5 p.m. Then he added that recently a newbie named Lev Kabakov joined their group. Kaha had a feeling he and Alina knew each other, but didn't want to show it. Once after the training was over, Kaha spotted them quarreling. He remembered the conversation, though did not understand its content. Alina demanded to find somebody and promised 10% for it. Lev claimed 25. He said that Alina must be kissing his feet for not disclosing her name. The detectives went on to look for this Lev. The members list had his address. Lev Kabakov was detained at the airport on arrival from Moscow. By then, the investigators knew enough about his past. The man had spent 2 years in prison on fraud charges. He was counterfeiting Marc Chagall's paintings. Kabakov told he had known Alina since they went to the same arts college in Moscow. 3 days ago, she was going to arrive in Moscow and asked to help her sell a Kandinsky painting. Lev knew a few collectors in Moscow. However, they did not meet at the airport. Lev proceeded to boarding, hoping that Alina was already in the plane, but she was not. To keep a low profile, Kabakov flew to Moscow. He would meet each and every flight from Dnipropetrovsk, expecting Alina to come later. After all attempts failed, he returned home. Hearing about Alina's death, Lev claimed with certainty that the murder was committed over Kandinsky's painting. Alina acquired it for peanuts from some old man. She had to restore it as the original painting was covered with somebody's watercolor drawing of goldfish. This fact brought up the aquarist's granddaughter, who told that Alina called her a prodigy and paid her 5 rubles for the drawing of goldfish. Kandinsky artwork titled The Shadow was painted in 1910. It was considered lost, and what a luck now! Lev completely denied his involvement in the crime. He was supposed to have a good chunk of the selling price, so why murder? Besides, he had an alibi. Before the flight, he went to a barber shop on Kosmicheskaya Square and spent over an hour there. The barber will certainly confirm it. Alina Feofanova, an employee of the Fine Arts Museum, is murdered right next to her apartment. Investigators find out that the victim was going to Moscow not to visit her aunt, but rather to sell Kandinsky's painting. Her old fellow, Lev Kabakov, promised to help her find a buyer. He told that Alina restored the artwork by removing the watercolor drawing from the original picture, which was considered lost. The detectives assumed that the drawing could be made by the granddaughter of a fish tank maker, Petro Leleka. Conservator Lydia showed the detectives a rare catalog published in the pre-war Germany and explained that the lost painting is titled as The Shadow in this edition only. In all other resources, its title is Improvisation 19. The detective asked about how frequently the aquarist came to Alina. Lydia replied that the man was interested in what was going on in the museum. Sometimes he came over to watch conservators at work, browsed through catalogs, and wondered about the cost of paintings. Petro was looking through this catalog as well. Lydia came to Alina for some lacquer and saw Leleka holding the German catalog in his hands. Alina was not in her office at the time, and Lydia said Petro could not be here while she's out. The visitor explained he was doing nothing wrong. He was just waiting for Alina to give her the fish tank filter he made for her. Leleka was inquiring about the painting's price again. Lydia wanted to get rid of him and, to cut out the conversation, answered simply, dozens of thousands. The detectives asked to borrow the catalog for some while, and Lydia agreed. However, she mentioned she had no idea how the catalog may be related to the crime and asked to return it to the museum as soon as possible. Petro Leleka was not at home when detectives arrived, and his sister said he was gone for 3 days. A trip was business as usual for him. He often goes to Moscow to buy accessories for fish tanks repairs. Officers showed Little Era reproduction of the shadow painting. The girl identified it at once and explained that she drew some fish over it to make it look brighter. Petrov was immediately enrolled on the wanted list, and soon enough, Moscow operatives called to report that the man was found at the hospital with skull injuries. He was attacked in a Moscow street. The detectives set off for Moscow without delays. There they were shown what was in Leleka's bag: a passport, some personal items, and a thermos, blue with a red rose. It brought up the victim's husband's account of an old Chinese thermos. In the bottom there were letters I and F, Igor Feofanov. Leleka agreed to testify at once. He killed Alina because she deceived and ripped off her granddaughter. The girl loved to draw, and he gave her a canvas which was collecting dust on his wall. Petrov could not even imagine the real value of that painting. One day he came to Alina's office to hand her a compressor faucet, came up to an easel, lifted the veil, and saw his painting. Half of the fishes were already erased. He noticed a catalogue on Alina's desk with a reproduction of the painting that had been hanging on his wall for more than 50 years. He figured that the artwork costs a fortune. He tried to cut a deal with Alina, but she would not listen. Her argument was simple. Petrov sold the painting on his own will. Attending the sport club, he overheard that Alina was set to fly to Moscow. He went into the empty locker room, found her bag, and looked at the departure time on a ticket. Leleka had no intention to kill. He had a knife just to scare Alina. He waited till she came out of the apartment and once again asked her to return the painting. He was appealing to her conscience, but in vain. She laughed right in his eyes. Rage and fury dazzled him, and he stabbed her in the stomach. Then he wiped off his knife, opened her bag to see a thermos with the painting inside. He grabbed it and left. On arrival in Moscow, he talked to a few collectors who confirmed it is Kandinsky indeed. Leleka sold his treasure for 50,000 rubles. Two thugs waited for him carrying the cash. Then he remembered nothing until he came to in the hospital bed. Alina Feofanova's murder cost Petro Leleka 10 years in prison. He did not manage to live to the end of this term, dying of a heart attack. His sister took on the custody of their granddaughter, Ira. The painting remains missing up until now.